Okay, we are now ready to go. So, good evening, everyone, and thank you to both of the candidates, Amy Laufer and Kellen Squire, for joining us tonight. We are going to be focusing on issues of public education during this candidate forum for the House District 55 tonight in Virginia. And it is an honor to have both of you with us. Candidate Laufer, we will start with you. 3 minutes for an opening statement.
Awesome. Well, I just want to say first, thank you, Becca, for hosting us, and to the Albemarle Education Association for having this forum and talking about this important issue that really is coming up at every door that I'm knocking on. Again, my name is Amy Laufer, and I am running to represent the House of Delegates 55 area. Originally, I'm from a dairy farm in Wisconsin. I'm one of 8 children. I paid my way through college. Took me 6 years, and I have a degree in geology. I did water chemistry for the state of Wisconsin until I went into the Peace Corps, where I was stationed at an elementary school. It totally changed my life. I fell in love with education and children. I came back and I got my master's in education from Teachers College, Columbia University. I taught middle school math and science, actually in New York City, and I came down to Charlottesville about 20 years ago, and I taught at Louisa Middle School as well as Tandem Friends School. While I was in New York, I'll say that I was proud part of the teachers union in New York City. And we actually had several moments where we got to picket. And I'm proud to say I held a sign that said, if you can read this sign, thank a teacher. And that is the sentiment that I really feel about education. I was also a proud member of the Virginia Education Association when I taught in Louisa. I feel very strongly about education and what it does for our society. We know it is a foundation, and our children are the future, and our teachers are professionals, and they should be treated as such. When I stopped teaching actually because my child had a medical issue, and I was asked to run for the school board. So I was on the school board in the city. I was chair and vice chair. And part of why I wanted to run for school board was not only to represent my child and children with special needs and all children, but also to, again, say that teachers are professionals and they should be treated as such. I'm proud of the work we did there. And eventually, I ran for state senate in 2019 against Bryce Reeves. And that's where I got this amazing pin. I worked with the Virginia Education Association, got very close. It was a plus 12 red district, and I got 48% of the vote. I've also founded a women's organization called Virginia's List that supports pro-choice Democratic women. We have supported every Democratic woman that's won for the past 8 years. I'm very passionate about women's rights and education, as well as gun violence prevention. I've been part of Moms Demand Action for a very long time. And I would just say that, you can't open the paper or look at the news today without seeing gun violence. We know that the Republicans are taking our rights away. Governor.
Sorry, that is your time.
Anyway, thank you. Very excited for this forum.
Okay, and now we will hear from candidate Squire.
Thank you, ma'am. I appreciate it, and I appreciate being able to be a part of this forum as well. My name is Kellen Squire. I'm an emergency department nurse here in Albemarle County and have been for the last 12 years. Before that, I worked in pediatric acute and intensive care at the University of Virginia Children's Hospital. I spent 3 years as an Albemarle County public school nurse, 1 year at the Elson Student Health Center at the University of Virginia. My wife, Carrie, who's also an emergency department nurse, and prior to that was a Louisa County firefighter, and I live in rural Albemarle County with our 3 kids who are all products of the Albemarle County Public School District. In 2017, I ran for the Virginia House of Delegates against the incumbent that now retired, Delegate Rob Bell, in what was considered to be the most entrenched incumbent in the most gerrymandered seat in the Commonwealth of Virginia. And despite the conventional wisdom that we shouldn't run candidates against people like that, we did anyway. And we caused the Virginia Republican Party to spend $500,000 to fight us off, including $125,000 the last week of the race, which, as my friend, former Congressman Tom Perriello said, was one of the sacrifice flies of 2017 that helped us get other runs on the board so that we could have the successes that we had in 2018, passing things like Medicaid expansion by a single vote. And after being on the front lines of fighting to protect our community from the COVID pandemic alongside teachers, after watching just dramatic assaults on our rights from all fronts, on reproductive rights, on women's rights, on trans rights, on civil rights, and after being in the emergency department here in Charlottesville, treating the victims of the Unite the Right attack in 2017, I stood up and I decided to run for this newly drawn district, the 55th House of Delegates district in Albemarle, Louisa, Nelson, and Fluvanna, because I saw a General Assembly building that didn't reflect the people of the Commonwealth of Virginia. I saw a General Assembly building lacking essential voices of frontline providers, of working class candidates, people that are in the community doing the hard work on the front lines, like teachers, like nurses, like firefighters, like EMTs, day in and day out. So that's why I'm here. That's why I'm standing up to run. My time as a public school nurse was one of the best of my life. We took that job because my wife and I calculated that it was cheaper for me to find a new job, to go down to part-time in the ER and find a new job than it was to pay for daycare. And I initially took it because I thought it would be pretty cushy, but I was quickly disabused of that notion as I was calculating insulin doses, as I was suctioning trachs, as I was doing tube feedings. But as much as I did as a school nurse, the teachers always did more. I was always had the utmost respect that they never gave up on any kid for any reason. And so again, I'm excited to be here tonight. Education is, people in our community love our public schools. They love our teachers. You'd never believe that listening to the governor. True.
And so our first, thank you both, and I'm sorry, maybe should give me a little bit more time, but I want to make sure we get to as many questions as we can.
Forum for candidates.
I'm gonna, Lisa, can you move
Esther
yourself?
Dawson is not coming.
Oh.
Sorry.
Oh, that's okay. Question one, as you might have guessed, we spend a lot of time thinking about the mechanics behind actually funding our schools. Virginia is behind the rest of the nation on teacher pay. Estimates on the cost of getting above the national average are in the hundreds of millions of dollars. And the Virginia Board of Education's prescribed standards of quality for K-12 schools would cost the state more than $1 billion a budget to finish implementing. While we sometimes see budget surpluses from inflation or a stronger than expected economy, this is not a given, and the total is always short of what is needed to move Virginia out of the bottom tier of states for education spending. How would you plan to raise sufficient revenue to meet these needs? And we will be starting this question with Kellen Squire.
So I think that's a great question. I think we need to, the obvious answer is we got to restructure our tax system to be able to do things like that. Now, every time I say that, people go, well, we've got Governor Youngkin. He's not going to let anything like that happen. And, be that as it may, we need to start trying to. Steps we can take in the interim until we can get to a systemic level like that is getting out of the way of localities trying to find solutions to their problem. We saw that happen in Charlottesville City, where the General Assembly wasn't content to not fund our schools, but they literally stand in the way of us figuring out how to solve that for ourselves. And that's just, you'd think it'd be a slam dunk thing. You'd think all these small government conservatives would be all about letting localities do what they want to, but it turns out that that's not the case. We need to do whatever that we can creatively in the interim. Like I said, one of the things that I would like to do, or one of the policies, for instance, I'd like to forward in the General Assembly building is a cost of living allowance for, and not just teachers and support staff and things like that, but firefighters, EMTs, other public servants, so that they can afford to live and work in the same communities. And if we can attract high quality teachers and education, because we're losing them to other states because we're not paying them what they're worth, then we can start to do, if we're attracting that talent, then we can start to make, we have the arguments now where we should be funding schools, and we haven't done that since what? The Great Recession, maybe before that. And there's just so many things in the interim that we can be doing while we're waiting to change the seat of the governor, while we're waiting to take back the Virginia House of Delegates and expand our majority in the Senate to ensure that these things will last beyond that. So that's what I think.
Excellent, thank you. And Amy, rather than reread the whole question, I will just I'll just read the final part. How would you plan to raise sufficient revenue to meet the needs of the schools?
Well, I mean, what we just saw in this past, Young Kids state grocery tax, it cut $200 million from our schools. And what we know about school funding, obviously, is a lot of this is driven by the standards of quality. So the state has kind of the prescription of what staff should be hired locally. And we know that there's 136 localities and all of them fund above the SOQ. And we know that there was a JLARC study made many years ago to talk about how insufficient the standards of quality are. And if we were to increase the standards of quality by using that JLARC study, we could actually show that the funding, we have to find the funding. Do you know what I'm saying? By keeping the SOQs where they're at, it puts a burden on the localities to fund the positions they need. And what that just creates is the wealthier communities are, able to do this. The communities that are struggling can't, and it just further increases, these divide. And I would say, number one, adopting the JLARC study, increases of SOQ. And then I would definitely repeal the grocery tax for sure, because, anyway, it's unbelievable to me that that was done without realizing what that would do to localities. And it's a gross negligence, So those would be.
Great, thank you. And now question 2, and Amy will answer this one first. We know that the quality of a teacher has among the largest impact on student outcomes of any factor in school settings. Yet in Virginia, we are experiencing a worsening shortage of teachers and have the 3rd least competitive teacher pay of any state in the country when you compare it to earnings of workers with similar education levels. How would you go about supporting and growing our teacher workforce in the state?
Yeah, well, first I would just say, again, teachers are professionals. They have skills. There's actually been a study to show that every year a child has an effective teacher, they actually in their lifetime will increase their earnings by $24,000. So the investment of teacher training, the investment of paying teachers as professionals has an impact on children and actually supports our society. And I would often hear people say that teachers didn't get into teaching for the money. But I would say they only say that because it justifies them not paying you as a professional. We should not allow that statement to be said because it further creates this idea that teachers are not professionals. Teachers have degrees, the skill in understanding how to take a child from, point A to point, Z. It's so much skill. And actually, there's a lot of studies to show that every minute in a teacher's day, they are making, hundreds of decisions based on what they're gauging from the children in front of them and the staff members they're working with. So I would absolutely say, of course, all of the teacher pay is with these steps. And, there's been so many studies to show that our first step is too low. I think it was like we were 40th in the nation at some point. I think we're 10% less than the US average. And, this has an impact on society. And I think the way we think about education, we have to think about it as an investment. So.
Thank you. And Kellen?
So actually, and I want to say Amy's exactly right. You know, I tell people that it wasn't working in as a public school nurse that really gave me a kindred spirit as a nurse to teachers. It was through the pandemic, because nurses were told too, oh, you're heroes. Oh, you're holding the line. And we did alongside teachers without resources, without support. And we knew if we didn't do it, nobody else would. And they said that so they didn't have to step up and support us to the level that we deserve. And I mean, obviously, as far as supporting teachers that way, teacher pay is up. We need to be, again, we're 49th or 50th in the country, I think, in relative pay, which is, I don't know how anybody finds that acceptable in the Commonwealth of Virginia. You know, one of the things, again, I'd like to point out, I'll say again, is a cost of living allowance so people can afford to work and live in the community that they serve in. You know, if you want to work in Albemarle and live in Greene or Nelson or Fluvanna or Louisa, great. But it should be a personal choice and not because you can't afford to live there. I'll admit that's more of a Band-Aid than I'd like, but at least it's a step in the right direction to getting talented educators, and not just teachers. I mean, if we think teachers aren't paid well, let's look at support staff. I mean, I could speak to that personally. I think as a public school nurse, I was getting paid less than half of what I made in the emergency department. And a lot of the skills that I used were emergency department skills. I mean, again, suctioning trachs and doing tube feedings and calculating insulin and giving Valium to seizing kids. I mean, so we need to pay teachers and support staff what they're worth. Beyond that, too, there's a lot of quality of life stuff that we can invest in that will help make up the difference. And I'm not talking about like pizza parties, right? Hey, we got you pizza. We know it's a hard day, but like, I was talking to teachers in Richmond that were working in Northern Virginia rather than coming to Albemarle, Louisa, or Nelson. And they said one of the biggest pulls for them was transportation, right? They can get on an Amtrak in Richmond. They can go up to Northern Virginia. They're on the train for an hour. They can finish all their work, check their emails, do stuff. They don't have to fight with traffic. They don't have to fight with parking. They don't have to fight with any of that, which, I mean, we don't have here at home in Albemarle County. So quality of life, things like that we can fix that aren't directly, again, pay would be the best thing, right? It'd be the number one thing. But if we have to look for other things in the continuum to fix, those are some of my ideas.
Thank you. And then as a follow-up to that, what role, I know you both have come out in support of collective bargaining. What role do you see our collective bargaining laws playing into strengthening our education workforce? And do you believe that these laws need to be changed? And we'll go back to Amy for the first part of that question, and then we'll come back to Kellen.
So, you know, obviously I'm in support of collective bargaining, and I would say being part of the teachers union, you know, it's about having everyone's back and supporting each other, especially in these really divisive times when the governor is, you know, hosting a snitch line. You know, teachers are really under attack, and I believe they need protections. And, you know, I saw it firsthand. The union actually, when I worked in New York City, we were next to the World Trade Center. And obviously, we evacuated that day. We saw the World Trade Centers fall in front of our eyes. And our school became the search and rescue, you know, for the fire department. And the union really stepped up. You know, they provided counseling. They provided a voice to say that we were not going to go back to the school where there was a toxic air, you know, really supported us. And I know that that is critical, you know, and that's why I joined the Virginia Education Association. I read through what the General Assembly passed for collective bargaining, and quite frankly, it's very minimal. And I think it's hard for school boards and localities to create that. And I think the onus is on the General Assembly to create the support that communities would need and school boards would need to implement this. And I would just say, I feel like I'm in a unique, you know, position to kind of understand the stakeholders and all of that. And I think it's critical for the General Assembly to do this, especially in the environment we're living in right now.
Thank you. And Kellen?
Well, I mean, we need collective bargaining. We needed it long ago. Look, the last 3 years of the pandemic were hell in the emergency department. There's no other way to put it. When healthcare systems collapsed in Shenandoah and Southwest and Southside, again, nothing against our colleagues in Northern Virginia or Richmond or Tidewater, but when those healthcare systems collapsed, they came to us. They came to us here in Charlottesville and Albemarle for help. And we stood up and we held the line, but it was a lot closer than I like to remember, right? It was a lot closer thing. It was really just luck that we were able to hold the line and our healthcare system didn't collapse here like it did in so many other places. And I can say without a single shred of doubt that the only reason that we held the line here in our community was the sacrifices made by teachers, by educators, by the administrators, and by the kids and the families here in Central Virginia that let us in emergency services hold the line through the worst of the pandemic. Again, teachers turned around to go to all virtual learning in what, 2 weeks? And again, they did that with a promise of support that never came, but they kept it up. They didn't quit because they understood what would happen if they did. And so I want to be very clear here. Teachers have always deserved collective bargaining. The pandemic didn't grant them that right. It was just that now, without any shred of doubt, anybody that's an impartial observer should be able to agree with that. And look, we've got a lot tougher times coming up. We have a legislative elections this year, obviously, they're going to be very important. And we're going to try our best. We're going to do everything we can. And I truly believe that we're going to flip the House of Delegates and expand our majority in the Senate. But I can't promise that sitting here right now. We have a presidential election next year that we don't know how it's going to turn out. We have a gubernatorial election and more legislative elections in 2025. And again, nobody here can promise you how that's going to turn out. And so if we want teachers to be able to fight for their right, we need to fight for their rights. They need to have a seat at the table. They need to be able to collectively bargain, because then whatever happens, they can stand up and protect themselves, improve their working conditions, and do the things that they need to do to look out for our students, our families, and our community. And again, collective bargaining, I believe, is the only way we can guarantee that they will have the ability to do that, not just today, not just tomorrow, but long into the future.
Thank you. And this is our next question. Kellen will go first and then Amy. Many Republicans in Virginia have been spreading misinformation about LGBTQ children, so-called critical race theory in schools, and are blaming completely unconnected equity initiatives on student outcomes impacted by the pandemic. How would you respond to culture war attacks like these on our schools?
Well, I think the important thing we don't do is use their terminology. That's a mistake I've made in the past, and I'm never going to do again, because when you're starting to argue on your terms, they're already sort of winning in that way. And they've pretty much openly said, what is the name, Christopher Rufo, whatever his name is. Anyway, I mean, he's pretty much openly said, yeah, we're trying to bait Democrats into doing this, because when we do, then we're going to do all these things too. And so first of all, we've got to stop fighting them on their terms and on their game. We need to push back. It's not enough to protect our kids. It's not enough to stand up to stuff. We have to fight back assertively, using words that work, going out into our community. One thing that I've seen pioneered in other places that I would love to do post-election this year is issues-based canvassing. So, most of the time we think about knocking on people's doors. We think about doing it for a candidate, for an election. We need to be doing issues-based. We need to be going out in the community and identifying people, and not talking about a candidate or even a political party, but issues. Education, and what we're talking about here, is a great one, because I think the latest polling that I saw, by vast majorities, Virginians are against restricting what teachers teach. They're definitely for letting kids be who they are. And I'm talking 70-80% majorities once you break it down to them. And the best way to do that is to go out and make those connections one-on-one in the community. Yeah, it's a lot harder to do, but you make those connections, they're much longer lasting. And again, we can't just play defense. We have to be assertively going after these things. We need to be doing things like running candidates who believe in the values that we believe in every single district, every corner, every zip code in the Commonwealth of Virginia, because all of those things that we leave, when we aren't there as a part of the conversation, other people fill it in. And again, if we're not the ones filling it in, it leaves some pretty scary people to do that instead. And if that's the only thing that people hear, I don't know why we're surprised at what happens.
Well, thank you. And then Amy, do you want me to repeat that last part of the question for you?
Yeah,
How would you respond? Yeah, how would you respond to culture war attacks like these on our schools?
yeah, we, you know, the Republicans constantly create issues that are not there. And it's to distract us from the real issues that we need to fight. And this persistence about transgender students, LGBTQ plus students, and the CRT is all an effort to divide us and create chaos. And I'm totally again, I will just say I've knocked doors for a very long time, obviously. And, when we hear these talking points, quite frankly, from the Republicans, from Fox News, that people are parroting back to us, I always bring it back to humanity. These are children, these are families in our community, and we need to support them, and we need to help them feel that they are part of the community. These are just smoke and mirrors that the Republicans put up. And, it's easier to do now because most of our news is national. And, we've kind of lost that sense of community through our own news, So obviously, I don't support what the governor is doing. And I think it's intentional. It's meant to harm, and it's meant to divide us, and we need to, in my opinion, obviously we're not ignoring it, but we have to bring it back to our own community, our children. You're talking about children, you're talking about families. We need to create community. And, obviously I don't know if that's I don't know exactly, but that's clearly, in my opinion, they're doing it intentionally to divide us and prevent us from actually working on real issues.
Thank you. And then the next question, Amy, you will go first. More than 65 years after the Supreme Court decision in Brown v. Board of Education, public schools remain heavily segregated by race and ethnicity. And in Virginia, segregation is worsening. We know from decades of research that integration of schools is one of the most effective means to improve all student outcomes. How would you address this, our legacy of segregation and unequal schooling that impacts our schools to this day?
I mean, we need to fund our public schools. That's the bottom line. By doing that, by having professionals in the classroom, treating them as professionals, this way we attract more students, and we also know that the SOQs, the standards of quality, as I mentioned, they're grossly under what is required, and it just increases the haves and the have-nots. And, we can also look at housing and how that contributes to this. Affordable housing in our community is part of what helps the public schools be more diverse. And so it's a multi-pronged approach, but I believe the bottom line is we need funding for public schools. We need to prioritize it.
And Kellen?
Well, I think especially in our community, this is good to bring up because a lot of what too many people don't remember is that Charlottesville and Albemarle were like the hot spot, the center for fighting against integration, for massive resistance. And again, that wasn't that long ago. My grandfather, right? My father-in-law went to Woodbrook Elementary School the first year that it was made, and Woodbrook Elementary School was made as a de facto segregated school. Like it was integrated, but they put it at that time that far north in Albemarle County and built the community around it to keep Black kids from being able to go there. And I said my grandparents are certainly no shrinking liberals, but when they realized that, they yanked him out and took him to Stone Robinson Elementary School, which was already integrated. And we've been, again, that's my, my father-in-law. It's not that long ago, and we still haven't grappled with the implications of that. So obviously we need to recognize our history and not run away from it or pretend that it didn't happen, because otherwise, how do you move beyond stuff that you're not willing to grapple with? And a lot of these solutions, Amy's 100% right. Fully funding public schools is going to make up a lot of that gap. But obviously, as most teachers know, like 65% of the problems that come into schools are generated from outside, from other factors. And so we need to do things like make sure we're not seeing any redlining, make sure we fix zoning problems, make sure we're doing housing and density and things like that will help solve that. One of the most eye-opening experiences of my life was the year that I spent living in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, which is the most segregated city in the United States of America. And there's just so many things, again, and so it can't be just about schools as an answer to this. We have to do it from outside of schools too. That's a good start with funding, with making sure we're teaching our history as is, and we're able to handle all these multi-factor things to be able to move forward.
Great, thank you. Now, Amy, you will go first for this one. In the wake of the Great Recession more than a decade ago, cuts were made to our state education funding formula that severely limited schools' resources for support staff. Even more than a decade later, K-12 state direct aid has only recently recovered to our 2009 high point when you account for inflation. We know now that the cuts were uneven and hit divisions with the highest share of students of color and living in poverty the hardest. What is your position on the role of support staff in K-12 schools, and what would you do to respond to the cuts that have not been fully addressed from a decade ago?
Well, I think I would go back to the standards of quality. Again, this is the document that the state uses to give us the, not only funding, but staffing formulas. And we know how critical support staff is. Obviously, as we saw with the bus driver shortage, how that impacted all families, and we know these are critical people in our schools. With our special education population, many of the aides are really become personal friends of the families. These are critical positions. And again, I will just say they should be treated as professionals. Going back to the JLARC study, there are plenty of places in the JLARC study that say we need to have more support staff. I think at one point we had one counselor for 200 students. That's obviously way too few. And, it doesn't do justice to the kids that are there. So I would, again, just go back to the state. The process there is the SOQ. And that is what we have to address, and then go from there.
Thank you. Kellen, I will repeat that. What is your position on the role of support staff in K-12 schools, and what would you do to respond to the cuts that have not been fully addressed from a decade ago?
Well, coming from somebody who was a support staff as a public school, they're obviously essential. And so, and looking back now, and I did the stuff that I did without even thinking about it. But now with, years behind me, a lot of the acute stuff that I did was stuff that I had training for because I was an emergency department nurse. That's not something that they normally have in schools. And so, every kid deserves to be able to be in public school. So again, the kids that had to do tube feeding for, or suction trachs for, the calculating medicine and do all of these things are very specialized skills. Again, not the reason I took the job was because my wife wanted to pursue her master's degree. And again, we did the math and realized that changing my career and going down to part-time, even with the giant pay cut to be a school nurse, was costing us less money than it would be to put our kids in daycare, put our kids in preschool. And so, we shouldn't have to make those kind of determinations. These support staff, no teacher should have to do those sorts of things that I did as a school nurse. Again, it's not like, oh, we're put a Band-Aid on little Timmy. There's definitely some of that stuff, but there's all sorts of other stuff. When I worked as an elementary school nurse, every spring, generally I'd have fifth graders come into my office with fifth grade girls with interesting circumstances, and having to be able to sit down and chat with them, unapologetically, and being able to take that to the teachers. I had kids that broke an arm on the playground, and I was able to make like a primary care appointment for them to get an x-ray rather than send them to the emergency department. And that's just, obviously that's only as it coming from a school nurse, but imagine, the psychologist. I think Nelson County right now only has one school psychologist for the entire county. And again, when we don't have these support staff in place, it just goes back on everybody else, right? When kids don't have the mental health resources they need, they end up in the emergency department in crisis. And so when we're not fixing it from the other side, we have to fix it at some point. The question is, do we want to fix it before it becomes a crisis, before the human cost of it becomes so immense? So we need to be fully funding these positions at the state level. I truly believe that. We're not doing enough for special needs kids. Kids with disabilities are absolutely being left behind. So funding them at the state level, funding everything to the level that they deserve. And whether it's bus drivers, school nurses, counselors, psychologists, or, individual aides for these students, we need to, just like Ms. Laufer said, treat them like the professionals they are, pay them what they're worth, and fund it at the state level.
Thank you. And so this one goes to Kellen first, and then Amy. Our community has seen an uptick in gun violence among teens and young adults in recent months. Some people are calling for increased police presence in our schools and the installation of metal detectors in our buildings. Others are calling for increased gun laws. Still others are calling for increasing access to mental health services. How would you address this in the General Assembly?
Well, so I've been an emergency department nurse here in Albemarle County for 12 years. I worked in the pediatric intensive care before that, and I have not, in the rest of my year combined, I have not seen anything like the last year in our community. And obviously I have to be a little circumspect about the things that I say publicly about that, but it's not anything I ever, even as an emergency department nurse, these are not things that you think about having to go through so much. And it impacts, I was on duty here when the hoax went into Charlottesville High School. And one of my doctors had a kid there, and watching us have to plan for a mass casualty event while he had to think, is my kid going to be part of it? Or every time the alert goes off for Albemarle High School, where my oldest goes, and I have to have that moment of there's no words that I can use to describe it. And so I think obviously it's a multifaceted thing that we need to do. Gun laws, absolutely. Look at Uvalde. You had one person with an AR-15 held off 400 heavily armed police officers. They were afraid to go in after one person with AR-15. I don't know why there's a discussion about banning high capacity magazines, red flag laws, things like that. We need to do community things like having third spaces. We've lost all the third spaces in our, society. Like, there's always home and work, and it's somewhere else to go and do and interact and be a part of a community. Well, we've systematically kept those from being available. And then we wonder why, people get tense. People don't have ways to relax. As far as SROs in school, I understand I understand both sides of that argument. So during the worst of the pandemic, when in the emergency department, we sometimes had people had to wait 12 or 15 hours to be seen. I don't know if you've ever been in an emergency department for an emergency, but if you have to wait that long, people get pretty tense. And so we could have brought police officers in, right, to help keep the peace, but that doesn't solve the problem. The problem was we had too many patients. We didn't have enough nurses. We didn't have enough doctors. We didn't have enough beds. And so people that are opposed to like SROs in school, I understand they're talking, we already don't have enough to fix the problems that we have, and we're going to, where's that money going from? I understand people that want it from like a immediate perspective, or like to protect people from coming in from outside. And if we're going to have SROs in school, they need to have a very defined, like, are they going to have to follow FERPA guidelines? Are they going to respect student privacy? So, I mean, we've got students here in the community with blended families with undocumented family members beyond them. I mean, are we going to have to make them worry that somebody's going to go in the office and rifle through that? And again, there's not any one solution to this problem, but we're the only country in the world that lets things be this way, and there's simply no excuse for it.
Thank you. And so, Amy, the question is, how would you address the issue of gun violence and school safety in the General Assembly?
You know, obviously what's going on in our community right now, you can't go on the news without hearing about, gun violence, and especially children with guns. And every mass shooting at the schools, I mean, we absolutely think, could that be me? Could that be my children? Could that be our classrooms? And yeah, this is the only country that allows that to go on. I believe we need meaningful gun, laws. I think we need to ban ghost guns. We need to ban assault weapons, and we need to absolutely hold manufacturers and gun owners responsible when their guns are used in a shooting and a fatality. And, these are things that are within our control. And to imagine that we are asking teachers to face this every single day, and every time we come up with another new measure, a safety measure of locking a door or finding a place to hide, we need to start asking ourselves, what are we paying as a society? Mental health issues. Imagine growing up doing that. We have generations of children that have had to hide behind the teacher's desk. I'll never forget when my son came home and said, I don't think we're all going to fit. I mean, this is a real concern. This is real life. And for us to walk around and pretend it doesn't exist, it's creating more problems, and in terms of the student resource officers, obviously we know that we're talking about school safety, but we know that a lot of reports show that minority students are, more impacted by student resource officers. And we know at the state level, we're requiring schools to report incidents. And the way that is reported can literally devastate a child's future. And so those are the things that we should start making sure that we're identifying the issues at its root, which is, in my opinion, I feel like a lot of the violence happens because people feel isolated, and making sure that our schools are places where people can find community, and then addressing all the other things, which a lot of times comes down to the fact that we have been starving our public schools from the resources they need, and we are now reaping that.
Thank you. And so, Amy, you will go first for this one. Our community has seen housing costs rise significantly. This impacts school employees who struggle to find homes in the communities they serve, and creates significant transition between schools and school divisions for some of our most vulnerable students. How would you work to tackle housing affordability?
So I'm actually on the advisory board for social services, and housing has been put in the category of social services because it's a critical component to families and people, to be able to work and live in our community. I think when we're talking about housing, I think of four things. First, there's land. That's really a locality's kind of land use plan. Then we have the financing, which can be greatly impacted by General Assembly because of the Virginia Housing Development Authority. That is a mechanism to actually give communities and developers to actually build homes. Then the other two components of building homes, of course, is the labor and the materials and supplies. And again, the General Assembly is in a position that they could be helping to create codes that materials and supplies could be easier to garnish. So, I think I could go into a lot of detail, but I will say too, today I actually presented the social services, yearly update to the Board of Supervisors. And I will say in Albemarle County, we've increased vouchers. We have, I think it's 760 families that are able to take advantage of that. We have a partnership with MACA to provide housing, workforce housing. And actually there was a presentation by one of the land trusts that they have actually developed homes, and those are being bought by, guess what, teachers. Actually, it was an amazing report to show that, we have to be working on this. And teachers living in their own communities can be so much more effective. I mean, when you go to the grocery store and you see the teacher, it just does something, there's a connection there. And it's really important for the community. And it's important that we have our professionals living in our community, working in our community. And there's a lot that the General Assembly can do to support, creating affordable housing.
Great, thank you. And then Kellen, the final piece of that question, as opposed to the comment, is how would you work to tackle housing affordability?
So one of the first things, I've said it a couple of times, I'll say it again. One of the first things I'd like to do is a cost of living allowance for teachers, support staff, these public servants that, yes, they absolutely deserve to live and work in the same community, because not only is that better for them, it's better for the entire community. Amy's right. When people are a part of the community they work in, it's better for everyone. We need to work on zoning and housing and letting localities. A great way to do that would be to repeal the Dillon rule. And every time I mention that, people are like, well, that's never going to happen. And, I'm sick and tired of hearing people say that. We need to try and make it happen so we can come up for local solutions to local problems for a lot of these things. We need, walkable communities where people can, live, work, and do all the same things. And a lot of that, again, is driven by zoning, by density rules, which are all things that we can fix. Other things, though, specifically, because that's more of punting it to the locality to do. But in the General Assembly, I'd like to do is things like going after predatory renting companies. I remember when I was a nursing student and having to apply to find places to rent for my daughter and people would take our security deposit and they go through and be like, oh, sorry, you weren't approved. And that was 2008, 2009. And I understand, subsequent to that, it's gotten, that's almost naive at how, I thought it was bad then, but again, I almost look back on that fondly for how bad it's become now. Or we take a look at like hedge funds like BlackRock, these sort of people that are buying up single family homes, right? I'd ban that in the Commonwealth of Virginia. We should just ban that outright. We shouldn't allow that to happen. There was John Oliver had a piece, a week or two ago, where he was talking about housing. And he said, and by the way, if you were born after 1988, you don't have to watch this because you'll never be able to afford a house. And it was, haha, funny, but it was sad because it's true. People of my generation, my wife and I, lucked out. We both were working full time and we barely got in right after the Great Recession, almost 10 years ago now. Actually, I think this week will be a 10-week anniversary of us purchasing our house, and we lucked out. But between student loans and a mortgage and daycare and all of these things, the only reason that we're on stable ground with being able to afford things now is the thousands of hours we had to work overtime in the ER during COVID. And nobody should have to work thousands of hours during a global pandemic to be able to be like, well, at least we're a little bit better off financially now. And so, like I said, so it's returning, again, localities to let them do what they need to do to make sure housing costs go down. We've seen blueprints for that, not just across the country, but here in Virginia already. And then it's the General Assembly fighting some of these systemic problems, like making sure that families can buy single family homes or other homes, making sure we go after predatory rental companies, making sure we do what we can to keep the price of rent down. Those are all things we can do in Richmond and should be doing.
That is time. That is time on that one. I've not had to cut you guys off. You guys have done a great job. Since we started a couple minutes late, I am hoping that you guys will let me ask one more question before we move into our closing statements. It may push us a little bit past 6:30, but I would like to, I do have one more question for you before we move into closing statements. Is that all right with both of you?
Yeah,
Okay,
for sure.
Great. And so Kellen, you will go first on this question. And the question is, how will you approach learning about bills on topics you are not totally familiar with? There's a lot of information that comes at you very fast and furious in the General Assembly. Obviously, you guys cannot be experts on all things. And so how will you learn about topics and bills that that are not in your immediate wheelhouse?
Well, one of the assets I think we have here in our area is we have just an incredible group of very talented, very smart, progressive activists, of university professors, of just a community that's involved in so many different issues from so many different backgrounds to be able to fall back and rely on. I've often said, especially now that there's no Republican in this race and doesn't look like that there will be, that we have no excuse to not swing for the fences from our district on policy and really set an example, not just here in Virginia, but across the country of what progressive activism can look like. And so it's really going to be, I've always been the kind of person, that I'm not the only I can fix it kind of person. In the emergency department, we can be as talented a provider as we want to be, but we can't save somebody's life alone. That's something that you have to learn very early on. And the General Assembly is no different. And so, I would like to work on, my friend Sam Rasool does things like write your own bill workshops, which I'd love to do here, to be able to get all sorts of diverse opinions and ideas and backgrounds in on what we need to do to make sure that we're having briefs early and preparing for what's coming up. Because you're right, all of that stuff is condensed into we have a part-time legislature that really is a full-time job, but all of that stuff is generally condensed into a very short period of time. And so we need to be able to move and go and respond as things do. And I think that we're blessed here because our community is set up to address exactly those issues. And so it's going to be relying on the people who know what they're doing, who have been on the ground, who've been talking, to be able to brief us so we know what's coming, what to respond to, what the Republicans are going to do, how to push, not just to defend that, but push back against it and be able to move the Commonwealth forward as a whole.
Thank you. And Amy, back to you. And the main question is, how will you approach learning about bills on topics you are not totally familiar with?
Well, I feel like that has been the whole thing I've ever done. As people know about me, I read a lot. Actually, the first time I ran for school board, I bought a book called How to Get Elected in a Small Town. So I believe a lot in listening to experts. And, I scour, quite honestly, through the newspapers, local and, the Times, the Post, and with a highlighter. Actually, I have highlighters around me, and really, try to learn as much as possible. But I feel too, our community is so blessed with so many experts. I've had so many fascinating conversations about topics that, one was about a certain fish in the Chesapeake that's trying to be saved, and hearing from experts, definitely, and reading as much as possible. And I will say that I'm on the Disability Commission for the State Senate. So we are constantly getting reports. And I am somebody that really reads through them and communicates with the experts in our area. I'm on the board for the Arc of the Piedmont. So of course I would ask them what their ideas are on these issues. And, working with the special education associations that are in the schools. So I think listening to as many experts as possible, reading as much as possible, and creating relationships with the leaders and experts in the field to come up with solutions. And we know that every issue is very complex, and there's a lot of collaboration and cooperation that has to go into creating a bill that'll be positively impactful to our community. So I'm excited about that opportunity to learn about issues more in depth.
Great. Thank you. And we will now move into the 3-minute closing statements. Amy, you will get to go first, and Kellen, you will go second. So go ahead, Amy.
Well, I just want to say thank you again, Becca and the Albemarle Education Association. I feel strongly that teachers are professionals. They should be treated as such. I have spent the past nearly 20 years as a teacher, a school board member, and advocate on local boards and commissions. I would love to take the work of this community to the General Assembly. As I said, I'm on the advisory board for social services. I've been on that board for 4 years, giving the presentation. Nearly 1/5 of Albemarle residents receive some sort of benefit. And these benefits impact not just the clients themselves, but their families. And I know a lot of the decisions are made at the General Assembly, and it starts there. And I would love to take this work, all of the community ideas that I've been hearing for so many years, to the next level. And I'd be honored to earn your vote. Obviously, the election is June 20th. Early voting starts May 5th. Please go to my website, www.lauferfordelegate.com, to get involved. And thank you again. And thank you, teachers, for the work you do every single day that positively impacts all of us.
Thank you. And Kellen?
Yeah, I want to, this was a fantastic forum. I had a great time. I'm really glad that we had the opportunity to go through this. And I know we've talked a lot about, and there's plenty of problems. I don't want to whitewash any of that, but I want to make sure that we end this on a positive note and talk about all the positive things that teachers, that educators, that all of the people that are involved in the public school system do each and every day for our community. Again, I saw it firsthand as a public school nurse. The way that teachers solve problems that would reverberate through the rest of either a child's life, through an entire family's life, that stuff matters. It matters. It's appreciated and noticed, because we hear a lot of doom and gloom, and there's a lot out there, but we need to make sure that while we're doing that, that we're authentically recognizing the hard work that y'all do day in and day out to hold the line, because if you don't, nobody else will. And it shouldn't have to be that way. And I'm sorry it is, but that's what you guys do unapologetically. You do it every single day. And I couldn't be prouder to be associated with you. Again, thank you very much for the opportunity to chat. It's been fantastic. If you have any questions for me or anything about what we talked about, my website is www.squireforyou, which is a lot, SQUIREFORYOU.com. Please feel free to reach out. Please feel free to reach out. It's okay.
Will you leave that meeting?
Go ahead.
Please feel free to reach out to me, ask me anything you'd like, and let's work to bring progress to Virginia together.
Thank you both so much. For those people who are watching the live stream, I'm going to stop the live stream now, and then we will restart it in half an hour when we start the forum for the 54. And the folks who are in the Zoom will have an opportunity to ask questions in small groups of the candidates who are present. So thank you all, and we will be back in half an hour.